Tons of games are announced every year, but there are some that I'm dying to see made. Some of them have been announced, some of them haven't, but I want to go ahead and talk about the games I am most looking forward to whenever they come out. The first ARMS is a far cry from Iconic, but the game is fun if just a little bit lacking. The sequel could just be called ARMS 2, or if it's on whatever's after the Switch, it could just be called ARMS again. I'd love for a much more robust game this time around. They decided they wanted it to be a party game rather than a standalone experience, which is fine. However, the game could be super fun single player as an experience if they truly let the concept take wing. Adding a story mode would be nice, even if it's completely silly. I'm not expecting Shakespeare, but a custom character trying to prove themselves in training and a tournament could be very fun, especially if there's an overworld where you can buy new attachments or upgrades to your arms. Obviously, you couldn't use this character online, but I don't see why you couldn't locally. Also, maybe let us see what our characters look like without the super stretchy arms on. Another addition would be more game modes. I'd love to see a 4-person match where everyone was fighting for themselves. It would be chaotic, but I think ultimately a ton of fun. I also want to see more sports represented. Arms tennis would be a fun minigame, as well as golf or polo. Keep the original basketball and volleyball, but get weirder and more out there with it. Let the concept truly take wing and breathe. Ty the Tasmanian Tiger 5 could also be Ty the Tasmanian Tiger 4, as the 4th game sucks. This is a series that I genuinely miss from my childhood, with a basic gameplay design fun enough to remain fresh and relevant in a modern era. There would have to be a pretty massive overhaul to some systems, and the writing would need to be modernized. That said, the jokes are still relatively funny and witty enough to entertain children and adults alike. I'd love to see what the new boomerangs could theoretically do, as modern hardware allows for possibilities that just weren't tenable before. What about a boomerang that turns enemies into a younger, more easily defeatable versions of themselves? Maybe a boomerang that grows trees wherever it hits the ground. What about one that's in the shape of a fish and is stronger underwater? I'd love to see some that are much more situational and don't work on every enemy. But for real, I'll explode if we get a 5th. I'm kind of surprised no console has picked this up as an exclusive series yet. I don't want it to be exclusive, but it makes a lot of sense that way. It really feels like a PlayStation platformer, and I would be absolutely over the moon if this became a first-party Nintendo IP. There is so much to Arthurian legend that can be explored, and I don't know why the video game market isn't more saturated with this content. The story of King Arthur is timeless. Camelot is an ethereal realm preserved out of time in this magical and mystified version of what the Dark Ages truly were. It's wonderful, and the stories that have been written since Once and Future King are fantastic, and the source material is great too. I'd love to see a little bit more put into the video game world. I want to be able to explore some of the legend in a game that just doesn't suck. Ideally, this would be an action RPG where you acquire upgrades and allies the further you get in the game. Maybe there could be a magic tree to explore based on your relationship with Merlin, and different fighting styles based on who you interact with. The Green Knight could help you one way, Lancelot can help you another, Merlin would lean further into the magic tree, but you don't have to take up magic with Merlin, and you don't have to take up any swordplay above the absolute basics. Ultimately, the game would push you toward completing the trials to get Excalibur and its scabbard, which is a lot like Zelda. Honestly, just make the game a pretty direct blend of Skyrim and a more traditional narrative-driven Zelda game, and I'm happy. Just don't make this game suck, or forgettable, or anime, because Fate Grand Order doesn't count. Look, I know we all hate reboots, but hear me out on this one. Sly Cooper started in 2002. That is 19 years ago at this point. Yes, the games are great, but the story is a little hard to just jump into as a new player, and I know some veterans have forgotten what's happened. Also, the last game kinda sucked, which doesn't help. That said, Sly is a really important part of Sony's video game history, and the game is super adaptable to modern hardware. The reboot can tell a modified version of the first game. I mean, Clockwork is the most memorable villain anyway, so it just kind of makes sense to do that. It could be a really fun revenge story against a villain we don't exactly know, but are trying to figure out as we play. One thing I'd want them to keep is the character switching mechanic. It is fun to play as Bentley and Murray from time to time. Just make sure the majority of the time you play as Sly. Ultimately, he is the coolest and more recognizable character, so you don't want to sacrifice that. I do think it's a game better marketed at a younger demographic, but there's no reason why this can't be slightly more adult in its humor. The original trilogy had jokes that landed with children on the surface, but had double entendres for older audiences to appreciate. I would love to see that return. One thing I would definitely add, though, is a better array of thief skills. Collecting the bottles in the first game was fine, but I think the point buy system in Honor Amongst Thieves was probably the best way to go about it. Before I get to my number one pick, let me talk about some honorable mentions. Mario Odyssey 2 feels remarkably obvious. It's clearly inevitable that they're going to do something given the runaway success that Mario Odyssey 1 won. Breath of the Wild 2 is a game that we know is coming, I'm just very hype on it. Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness Remastered I don't think will ever happen, but I would love for this game to be put on new hardware so I don't have to play it on the GameCube. Okay, Dragon Ball Xenoverse 3, just Bandai, please stop releasing updates to the second one. It's been like 5 years and I don't want to keep buying DLC. Just give me a new $60 game with all your new ideas put into it. This is obvious if you know me. Persona is my favorite series ever, of all time, and the newest entry cannot come fast enough. It's weird because I feel like I have plenty to go back to and play happily, and I'm somewhat content right now. That said, I want to see where the series can and will go in the future. We know the game is in development, we just don't know what to expect in terms of tone or release. I expect an announcement this year, but ultimately we'll have to wait and see for the most part. I really hope we can select the gender of our protagonist and have player-sexual NPCs. It's not as much for me, I don't really care about that kind of stuff, but it's really important for others. I want this game to be available to everyone and grow an even larger audience than Persona 5 had. Some incels will probably boycott the game if this is the case, but I'd kind of prefer if they were gone anyway. One thing I do want to see is a return to more realistic confidants. One of the biggest issues for me is how over the top people's problems are in Persona 3 and Persona 5, where the core group of Persona 4 has much more understandable issues and problems. I know the spectacle of 5 is why the series is doing so hot right now. I just kind of wish we could return to Earth, at least a little bit. So those are my most anticipated upcoming games. I would absolutely love to hear some of the games you're looking forward to. Hopefully this sparks some ideas of what they could do with different things. I know some of my takes were a little bit out there, but I am super excited. And if you haven't played any of these games, I know that some of this probably didn't make sense. So sorry about that, but I would absolutely adore to hear what you guys have in mind. If you have played any of these games, let me know what your thoughts are on my takes for upcoming entries. And like we always say here on the channel, I hope to see you around sometime. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you're interested in watching more, this has actually been part of our Month of West campaign here on YouTube. I'll be putting up a video every single day this month and just a couple extra on my birthday. So if you're interested in seeing more, you can subscribe somewhere over here. You can go ahead and catch more videos in the playlist right over here. And if you just want to see more of my face, go ahead and pause that video.